They all walked past me like I didn't exist, until one night, my mop made me the richest man in the room. My name is Joseph Martinez, and for the past 5 years, I've worked the kind of job most people never notice unless something goes wrong. I'm 32 years old, a single father, and every evening I push a rattling cleaning cart through the marble hallways of Meridian Corporate Tower, a place where power wears tailored suits and shoes so polished they reflect your worth back at you. Every time I pass through those glass doors, I know exactly where I stand in the building's invisible hierarchy. People see my blue uniform and look right through me, as if the badge on my chest says not important enough to matter. Still, I show up on time every night. The fluorescent lights hum above me as I mop the same floors that men in $1,000 shoes scuff up without thinking. I empty trash cans filled with crumpled contracts and half-finished ideas, clean fingerprints from the doors of offices I'll never be invited into, and polish the conference tables where decisions worth millions are made. The silence of those late hours is heavy, and in that silence, it's easy to start thinking too much. Sometimes I wonder if a man can disappear slowly, not all at once, but piece by piece, until he's nothing more than a background detail in someone else's story. Every drop of sweat, though, has a reason. Her name is Clara, 6 years old, with a missing front tooth and a laugh so bright it could light up the darkest corners of this tower. Every morning when I get home, she runs to me with her drawings, holding up pictures of Daddy at work. She colors me in blue, always smiling, standing in front of a building that touches the clouds. To her, that building is a castle, and her daddy works in the tallest tower. She tells her friends, "My daddy helps make everything clean and shiny." And she's right, even if she doesn't know the truth behind the shine. There's a pride that comes with being seen through your child's eyes. To Clara, I'm not invisible. To her, I'm the whole world. That's what keeps me moving, even when exhaustion presses against my bones like wet cement. I tuck her into bed each night before my shift, whispering stories about castles and heroes and promises that one day things will be better. She doesn't need to know how much I've given up to keep that promise alive. Because once, I wasn't a janitor. Once, I sat behind desks where people listened when I spoke. But life has a way of changing directions when you least expect it, and sometimes survival means accepting a smaller dream, just to protect a bigger one. Mine was named Clara. By 10 o'clock, the building starts to empty. The chatter of executives fades into the soft hum of elevators and the low murmur of cleaning machines. I prefer these hours. The quiet ones when nobody's watching, when I can work without hearing my name barked over. Someone's shoulder. The marble floors gleam beneath the reflection of city lights streaming through the glass, and I can see my shadow stretching far behind me. It's strange how, in a place filled with so much light, I've learned to live in the dark corners. Sometimes, as I wipe down the conference tables, I read the faint impressions left on abandoned papers. I see budgets, contracts, strategies, signs of a world that used to be mine once. 4 years of college, a degree in business and linguistics, a future that should have gone differently. But that's not something I can think about for too long, not when bills wait like wolves outside the door. There are moments, though, when I let my imagination slip. I picture walking into one of those boardrooms not with a mop, but with a briefcase. I imagine the looks on their faces if they knew that the man cleaning their floors could probably explain their contracts better than they could. But those are dangerous thoughts. Daydreams have no place in survival. So I swallow them and keep moving. It was a Thursday night when everything changed. Thursdays were usually quiet. Executives gone, lights dimmed, just the soft drone of air conditioning and the rhythmic squeak of my cart's loose wheel. But that night, as I reached the 20th floor, I heard something different. Voices. Not the casual kind that came from janitors chatting on break or security guards checking in, but sharp, urgent voices echoing from behind the frosted glass of the executive conference room. I hesitated in the hallway, my hand tightening around the handle of my mop. That room was usually dark by this hour, but light spilled out in uneven streaks through the glass. The kind of light that meant a storm was brewing inside. I could make out fragments, angry tones, words like deadline, merger, and impossible. The kind of words that could destroy people's careers or make them legends overnight. Part of me wanted to turn around, keep my head down, stay invisible. That's what you're supposed to do when you work where I work. But another part of me, a part that hadn't spoken in years, was curious. It had been so long since I'd heard the language of business spoken up close. I inched closer, my footsteps soundless against the carpet. Through the frosted glass, I saw shadows moving, tall figures pacing, one woman standing still at the head of the table, her gestures sharp, commanding. I recognized her immediately. Olivia Richardson, the CEO of Richardson Industries, the woman who could make or break lives with a signature. Even from where I stood, I could feel her presence radiating through the glass. For a moment, I just watched. Maybe it was foolish curiosity, or maybe it was something deeper, an ache to remember who I used to be. I thought about Clara, asleep in her bed, about all the stories I'd told her of heroes who found themselves in unexpected places. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered if maybe life was about to hand me a story of my own. I tightened my grip on the mop handle and glanced down the empty hallway. No one else was around. The security cameras were pointed toward the elevators, not the conference door. Whatever was happening inside that room, no one was supposed to see it. But I'd spent 5 years walking these halls unseen, 5 years cleaning up after other people's chaos. Maybe it was time I stepped into the light, even if only for a moment. My pulse quickened as I pushed open the side door, its metal hinge sighing softly. The voices inside sharpened immediately, the tension cutting through the air like static. For a heartbeat, I thought no one had noticed me. Then, the woman at the head of the table turned. Her eyes, cold and brilliant as glass, locked onto mine. I opened the side door, straight into a storm of shouting executives. She laughed at me like I was dirt, then promised me her salary if I could prove her wrong. The air inside the conference room felt electric, charged with frustration and expensive perfume. I stood frozen by the door, my cleaning cart parked quietly behind me like a nervous companion. At the far end of the long, mahogany table stood Olivia Richardson, CEO of Richardson Industries, and the woman who, at that moment, looked ready to set the world on fire. She was beautiful in the way a lightning storm is, something you admire from a distance but never dare to approach. Her blonde hair caught the glow from the overhead lights as she gestured sharply toward the massive screen behind her. "This merger is falling apart," she snapped, pointing at a document filled with English and Japanese text. "The Yamamoto Corporation refuses to remove this clause, and our translator's out until next week. I'm not signing anything I can't read." Around the table, a dozen executives shifted uneasily, avoiding her eyes. The screen glowed with black Japanese characters scattered like a code across white light. To them, it was an indecipherable mess of foreign symbols. To me, it was perfectly clear. I could read every line, every term, every hidden implication. But that was a part of myself I had buried years ago, and right now, I was supposed to be invisible. I tried to move quietly, keeping my eyes down, emptying the trash bins one by one, pretending not to hear the frustration in her voice. My goal was simple. Get in, clean, get out, stay unseen. That was the unspoken rule for people like me. "Maybe we could use an online translator?" One of the vice presidents ventured nervously. He was a pale man with thinning hair and the kind of voice that cracked when he spoke. At least we'd get a general idea of what it says. Olivia turned slowly, her heels clicking against the floor like a warning. "Richard," she said, her tone dripping with disdain, "this document represents $50 million. You want me to rely on Google Translate?" She let out, "Oh, short, humorless laugh that echoed across the room. You might as well flip a coin. Her sarcasm drew awkward laughter from the other executives, the kind people give when they're terrified of disagreeing. I kept my head down, moving towards the corner, pretending to scrub a perfectly clean surface. "Unbelievable," she muttered, pacing in front of the screen. "All these degrees, all this talent, and not one person in this room can read Japanese?" Silence. The kind of silence that swallows air and makes everyone smaller. She turned toward the window, exhaling sharply. That's when her gaze landed on me. Her eyes narrowed, and for a split second, I thought she'd tell me to leave. Instead, she smiled. Slow, cold, deliberate. "You know what?" she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Maybe we're overcomplicating things. Maybe we should ask our cleaning staff." A nervous chuckle rippled through the room. My chest tightened, and my hands froze on the trash bag. "I mean, he's right here," she continued, pointing the laser pen toward me. "Who knows? Maybe our janitor has a secret background in international business law." The laughter this time wasn't nervous. It was cruel. I felt heat rise to my face. I'd endured jokes before, snide comments, looks that dismissed me as background noise. But this was different. This wasn't ignorance. This was entertainment at my expense. Her smile widened when she saw my silence. "Tell you what," she said, resting a manicured hand on the conference table. "I'll make it interesting." She leaned forward, her tone turning playful, almost theatrical. "If you can accurately translate even one paragraph of this Japanese text, I'll give you my entire annual salary, every penny of my 7-figure income." The room went dead silent. Someone actually coughed, just to break the tension. My heart thudded in my chest, loud enough that I thought they might hear it. Olivia straightened up, eyes glittering with challenge. "How about it, Mr.?" She squinted at my name tag. "Mr. Martinez? Would you like to take a shot at being a millionaire tonight?" The executives shifted uncomfortably, their gazes bouncing between her and me like spectators at a fight they didn't want to see. The VP who'd spoken earlier rubbed his forehead, mumbling something about professionalism. But Olivia ignored him. She was enjoying herself too much. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to finish my cleaning, apologize, and leave that room like the invisible man I'd trained myself to be. But something inside me, something buried deep under years of quiet humiliation, stirred. For 5 years, I'd watched these people talk about vision, innovation, leadership, while never seeing the people who made their world function. I'd swallowed my pride 1,000 times just to keep food on the table for Clara. But in that moment, hearing her laughter, something changed. Her amusement wasn't just at me. It was at everyone who'd ever been told their worth was measured by their title. It was at the idea that someone like me could never be more than what my uniform said I was. She tilted her head, mock sympathy crossing her face. "Come on, Mr. Martinez. I promise not to laugh too hard when you get it wrong." That laughter, the one that rolled off her tongue like silk hiding steel, hit a place inside me I hadn't touched in years. I saw Clara's face in my mind, her little drawings of Daddy in the big shiny building, the faith in her eyes, and I realized something simple but powerful. I couldn't let my daughter's hero shrink into silence anymore. I set the trash bag down. Slowly, deliberately, the laughter began to fade. Olivia's smirk faltered just a little as she noticed the change in my posture. I wasn't hunched anymore. I wasn't trying to disappear. When I finally spoke, my voice came out calm, steady, and stronger than I felt. "Ma'am," I said, locking eyes with her, "I accept your offer." For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of us, sharp and unrelenting. Olivia blinked, her confidence flickering for the first time. She had expected embarrassment, maybe an apology. She hadn't expected defiance. "What did you just say?" she asked quietly, though every person in that room had heard me loud and clear. "I said," I repeated, taking a step forward, "I accept your offer." And in that instant, something irreversible happened. The janitor she mocked had just declared war on her arrogance. I heard my own voice say, calm and steady, "I accept your offer." When I spoke Japanese, her smile vanished like a mask melting under heat. The room was so still I could hear the faint hum of the projector and the soft ticking of Olivia Richardson's diamond-studded watch. The other executives sat frozen in their chairs, their faces caught somewhere between fascination and horror. No one dared to speak. I could feel their eyes crawling over me like they were trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The janitor, the man who emptied their trash and polished their shoes, was standing before them, daring to accept a CEO's challenge worth $1 million. My hands didn't shake, but my heart was beating hard enough to feel in my throat. For years, I had swallowed my pride and my voice, forced myself to fade into the background just to survive. But as I looked at the Japanese text projected on the screen, something old and powerful stirred inside me. It felt like coming home to a language, to a version of myself I'd buried under exhaustion and circumstance. I stepped closer to the table. Olivia crossed her arms, smirking, trying to regain control of the moment. "Well, Mr. Martinez," she said, her tone dripping with mock patience. "We're waiting." I let my eyes move across the characters on the screen. Clear, structured, familiar. I'd spent years studying this language, learning not just the words, but the culture, the intention behind every phrase. Japanese legal language wasn't something you could fake. It required precision, context, and respect. "This section," I began, my voice quiet but firm, "outlines the intellectual property transfer agreements between Richardson Industries and the Yamamoto Corporation." A few heads turned toward me, frowns deepening as I continued. "It specifies that any technology developed jointly during the merger will be owned equally by both companies. However," I pointed toward the bottom line, "the licensing rights extend for 15 years post-acquisition, effectively binding your R&D output under joint control long after the merger concludes." No one moved. The words hung in the air like a spell that had broken the silence. "This subsection," I went on, "clarifies that all pre-existing patents remain the property of the original holder. However, they can be licensed to the partner company at a preferential rate, not exceeding 12% of the market value." The executives exchanged looks, confused, stunned, then slowly dawning with realization. One man, Richard, the same vice president who'd nervously suggested Google Translate minutes ago, blinked at the screen like he was seeing it for the first time. That's exactly what the consultants told us last month," he muttered under his breath. I nodded slightly, not breaking eye contact with Olivia. "Except," I added, "what the consultants missed is that this clause also restricts unilateral technology transfers. That means if your team innovates a product line after the merger, you'll need written consent from Yamamoto before taking it to market. Essentially, you'd be giving them veto power over your own creations." A ripple of whispers broke through the table. Someone cleared their throat. Another adjusted his tie. The confident atmosphere that had filled the room minutes ago was collapsing under the weight of understanding. Olivia's smirk was gone. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting between the screen and me. "You're saying this contract puts us at a disadvantage?" I turned toward her fully. "I'm saying this contract would give Yamamoto Corporation control over your intellectual assets while you think you're entering an equal partnership. You'd be trading your autonomy for an illusion of collaboration." Her fingers tapped against the table. Fast. Nervous. "How do you—" She stopped herself, swallowing whatever insult she'd been about to throw. "How are you so sure?" "Because, Miss Richardson," I said evenly, "I studied Japanese business law and international trade negotiation at Columbia University. This language pattern is standard in corporate mergers designed to secure leverage for one party under the guise of equity." The room went dead silent again. You could feel the shift, like everyone had just realized they'd been blind. The janitor wasn't the fool they'd imagined. I kept going, my voice steady, my words deliberate. Paragraph 3 here, I gestured to the screen, establishes joint liability in the event of intellectual property disputes. Arbitration is set to be conducted through the International Chamber of Commerce in Tokyo, which means any legal conflict would take place under Japanese jurisdiction. In short, if Richardson Industries ever disagreed with Yamamoto's interpretation, you'd be fighting on their turf by their rules. One of the senior executives, an older man with gray hair and the kind of face that rarely changed expression, leaned forward slowly. That's a trap. It's leverage, I corrected. Yamamoto's legal team is brilliant. They crafted this to seem cooperative while maintaining strategic control. As I spoke, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Confidence. Real, grounded, undeniable confidence. Every syllable reminded me of the years I'd spent studying late into the night, believing I'd someday stand in a room like this as an equal. For so long, I'd been silent, my knowledge trapped behind the walls of circumstance. Now it poured out like water from a dam finally cracked open. When I finished translating the final section, the silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was reverence. Even the air felt heavier. The only sound came from the faint hum of the projector. I could see the executives looking at me with new eyes that weren't sure how to reconcile the janitor they'd ignored with the man who'd just saved them from a multi-million-dollar disaster. Olivia was still standing at the head of the table, but her composure had fractured. Her face had gone pale, her knuckles white as they gripped the edge of the table. She wasn't used to losing control, not in her own boardroom, and certainly not to someone she'd mocked minutes earlier. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its confident rhythm. "That's remarkable," she said slowly, each word forced out like it tasted bitter. You translated all of that from memory?" "Not from memory," I replied, "from understanding." She blinked at me, as though trying to calculate what that meant. "Understanding?" "Yes," I said quietly, "because knowledge isn't about memorizing words. It's about knowing what they mean, and what people intend when they use them. And these people," I gestured to the screen, "intended to own you." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. A few of the executives shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward, wanting to hear more but not daring to speak. Olivia stared at the screen, her jaw tightening. For the first time, I saw something that looked like humility in her eyes. Or maybe it was fear. I could tell she was processing everything, watching her empire tilt on its axis, realizing that the man she'd ridiculed had just saved her from signing away her legacy. When she finally looked back at me, her expression was stripped of arrogance. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't smirking or laughing. She was just staring, confused, vulnerable, and very human. Her voice came out softer this time, almost hesitant. "How do you know all this?" I met her gaze, the air between us heavy with everything unsaid, the years I'd lost, the life I'd buried, the truth she wasn't ready to hear. She whispered, "How do you know all this?" And she wasn't ready for my answer. While I was being mocked, my daughter was drawing me as a hero. While the echoes of laughter still burned in my ears that night, across town, a small lamp glowed in the corner of our modest apartment. My daughter Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, crayons scattered around her like tiny bursts of color against the faded rug. Her tongue stuck out in concentration as she worked on a drawing. Another picture of Daddy at work. The paper showed a tall building with shiny blue windows that stretched up into the sky. In front of it, she'd drawn a man in a blue uniform, smiling, his hands holding a mop that looked more like a sword. Above it, in uneven block letters, she had written, "My daddy makes the building sparkle." In Clara's world, there were no CEOs or janitors, no hierarchy of worth defined by clothes or paychecks. There was only pride, simple, pure, and unshakable. She didn't know that while she colored her perfect version of me, I stood in a room full of people who saw me as nothing more than a shadow. Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, sat nearby in her worn armchair, a cup of tea cradled between her hands. She had become more than just a babysitter over the years. Since Clara's mother left, she had been family. Someone who stepped in without ever being asked, who saw the exhaustion in my eyes and filled the quiet with kindness. "That's a beautiful picture, sweetheart," she said, leaning forward to admire Clara's work. Clara beamed. "It's Daddy at his building. He helps make everything shiny. Mrs. Henderson, do you think Daddy knows how proud I am of him?" The old woman smiled gently, the corners of her eyes softening. "Oh, I think he knows, darling. But maybe tell him again tomorrow, just to be sure." Clara nodded with that serious determination only children have. "I will." She reached for another crayon, carefully outlining the sun in bright yellow. "Mrs. Henderson," she said after a moment, "Tommy at school said his daddy makes more money than mine. He said cleaning isn't a real job." Mrs. Henderson's expression faltered for a heartbeat. Then she set down her tea and leaned closer. "Sweetheart, money doesn't make someone important. What makes your daddy special is how much he loves you and how hard he works to take care of you. That's worth more than any money in the world." Clara thought about that for a moment, her small brow furrowed. Then she smiled again. "I think so too. My daddy's the best at cleaning. He makes the whole building look like magic." When I finally came home that night, long past midnight, the apartment was dark except for that same little lamp. Clara was asleep on the couch, clutching her drawing to her chest. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her chair as I entered, exhaustion pulling at my shoulders. "Rough night?" she asked quietly. I managed a tired smile. "You could say that." She stood slowly, setting her teacup aside. "She wanted to wait up for you. Said she had a surprise." I crouched beside the couch and gently lifted the paper from Clara's sleeping hand. Her drawing made my throat tighten. To her, I wasn't invisible. I was everything. Her faith in me was so absolute it hurt. Mrs. Henderson touched my shoulder lightly. "Whatever happened tonight, don't let it make you forget who you are. You're doing right by that little girl." I nodded, but my voice wouldn't come. I just looked at Clara's peaceful face and wondered what she'd think if she saw how people treated her daddy at the shiny building she loved so much. Would her pride fade? Would she see me the way they did? When I finally went to my small bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the weight of the night sink in. Olivia's laughter still echoed in my head, sharp and cold. The faces around the table, the smirks, the disbelief, the way no one had stepped in to stop her, played on a loop I couldn't turn off. There's a special kind of pain in being mocked for something you once worked your whole life to master. It's not just embarrassment, it's grief, the loss of who you used to be. I thought about how easily they'd dismissed me, how one cruel laugh had erased everything I once was, the student who'd dreamed of building bridges between cultures, the man who'd believed intelligence could be its own kind of freedom. Now all of that was buried under the label of janitor. But as I sat there, staring at the drawing in my hand, I realized something that hit harder than any insult. I didn't endure that job for their approval. I did it for her, for the little girl who saw her father as a hero, not because of what he earned, but because he showed up every day and didn't quit. And maybe that was the truest kind of strength, to keep standing when the world made it easier to disappear. Outside, the city was quiet. The same skyscraper I had just left stood in the distance, its lights glittering against the night sky. From here, it looked peaceful, beautiful even. You couldn't see the arrogance in its hallways or the laughter that could cut like glass. I lay back and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the steady rhythm of Clara's soft breathing from the couch. Somewhere inside me, something had shifted. The humiliation hadn't broken me. It had sharpened me. Because if life had taught me anything, it was this: no one can take away what you truly know, and no amount of arrogance can erase quiet dignity. Tomorrow, I'd walk back into that building the same as always, with my cart, my mop, and my silence. But things would be different now. I'd seen the truth behind their polished smiles, and I wasn't sure I could go back to pretending anymore. I folded Clara's drawing and set it carefully on my nightstand before turning off the light. I didn't know that before sunrise, that same building would never see me the same way again. The woman who owned the room now looked at me like a question she couldn't answer. The boardroom still felt thick with disbelief when I turned back to the screen. Olivia Richardson's once commanding posture had shifted, arms still crossed, but now more like armor than confidence. I could see the doubt flickering in her eyes, the kind of doubt that comes when the ground under you suddenly stops feeling solid. No one spoke as I walked closer to the projected text. The white light from the screen washed across my face, and in it I saw every year I'd spent trying to hide what I knew. My reflection looked strange. Half janitor, half something else entirely. "There's another clause you should understand," I said, pointing to a small section near the bottom. On the surface, it looks like a standard cooperation term, but the phrasing tells a different story. Olivia straightened a little. "Explain." "The verb forms here," I said, tracing the kanji characters with my finger, "aren't written in a neutral tone. They use what's called kenjogo, a humble form of Japanese. In business contracts, it signals subordination. It's polite, but it establishes hierarchy. Richardson Industries is written as the subordinate party." One of the younger executives frowned. "You mean it's respectful language?" "It's more than that," I replied. "It's deferential. It acknowledges Yamamoto as the senior partner. It's subtle, but in Japanese culture, the power balance is built directly into the language. You don't just sign a contract, you sign your place in it." The room fell silent again. Olivia moved closer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I could tell she was listening now, not as a skeptic, but as someone realizing just how much she didn't know. "If you sign this as it stands," I continued, "you'll lose not only financial control but moral leverage. Every future negotiation will begin from a position of weakness because this document declares, in their own words, that you are the junior partner." She stared at the screen, her jaw tightening. The tension in the room pulsed like a live wire. I could almost hear her thinking, recalculating the decisions she'd made based on assumptions of equality. "This is what they were hiding behind the language barrier," I said. "A hidden dominance clause disguised as courtesy." Richard, the nervous vice president, cleared his throat. We would have signed it." I nodded slowly. "You would have. And within a year, you'd have handed over most of your innovation rights. That's not collaboration. It's surrender wrapped in translation." Olivia exhaled, her voice quieter now. "You just saved this company millions." "I didn't save it," I said softly. "I just read what was already there." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector and the whisper of city traffic through the glass walls. Then Olivia turned to face me fully, her confidence gone, replaced by something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Maybe even humility. "I misjudged you," she said finally. "Badly." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what to say that wouldn't sound bitter or self-righteous. Part of me wanted to remind her how easily people like her dismissed people like me, how quickly she had turned my existence into a punchline. But another part of me, perhaps the part that still wanted to believe in second chances, stayed quiet. Instead, I stepped back and reached for the trash bag I'd set aside. My instinct was to return to the background, to fade away before the moment could sour. But she stopped me. "Mr. Martinez." Her voice was steady again, though softer than before. "You said earlier you studied at Columbia. Business and linguistics?" I nodded. She hesitated, the words almost catching in her throat. "Then what are you doing cleaning my offices?" The question hung there, heavy and unkind, but I could tell she didn't mean it cruelly this time. It was genuine confusion. "Because life doesn't always care about degrees," I said, "and because I have a daughter who needs me more than a career ever did." Something flickered in her eyes at that. something human. For the first time, Olivia Richardson didn't look like the untouchable CEO who commanded every room she entered. She looked like a person realizing that she might not be the smartest one here, and the weight of that realization humbled her more than any reprimand could. Around the table, the executives sat in uneasy silence. Some looked embarrassed, others ashamed. A few couldn't even meet my eyes. "You've been cleaning our offices for how long?" she asked. 5 years. She blinked, stunned. "And all that time, no one ever asked," I said simply. That hit harder than I expected. The words were simple, but they stripped away all her power. She nodded slowly, her gaze lowering to the floor for just a second before she gathered herself. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For earlier." I shrugged. "It's all right." "It's not." There was another long silence before she looked back at the screen, then at me. "What do you think we should do?" "Renegotiate," I said. "But this time, from strength. Tell Yamamoto Corporation that you caught the implication, and you're rewriting the agreement to reflect equal partnership. They'll respect that, more than you think. Japanese corporations admire diligence and awareness. They won't see it as aggression. They'll see it as competence." Olivia tilted her head slightly. "You sound like someone who's done this before." "I used to," I replied, unable to keep the edge of nostalgia from my voice. "Before life took me somewhere else." Her expression softened again. "You don't talk like a janitor." "I don't think like one either," I said, then paused. "But I've learned something these past 5 years that no textbook ever taught me." She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "That the people you overlook are the ones who keep your world standing. You just don't notice them until something breaks." Olivia's eyes held mine, and in them I saw understanding dawn. Slow, reluctant, but real. She looked around the table at her silent executives, at the people who had let her mock me without protest. Then she looked back at me and nodded. "You're right," she said. "We've all been blind." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. The truth didn't need decoration. It was enough to see her realize it. As I gathered my cart, thinking the moment was over, Olivia stepped forward. "Mr. Martinez." I turned. She hesitated for a second, then extended her hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of everything that had just happened. The humiliation, the lesson, the quiet respect that had replaced arrogance. "How would you like to work for me?" she said, her voice steady now. "For real?" For the first time since I'd walked into that room, I didn't feel invisible. She extended her hand. "How would you like to work for me? For real?" 3 days later, I walked the same hallway. No cart, just a briefcase. It's strange how quickly a place can change when you're the one who changes in it. 3 days earlier, I'd pushed a squeaky cleaning cart down this very hallway, invisible to everyone who passed. Now, I walked the same polished floors wearing a borrowed suit and carrying a leather briefcase that once belonged to my father. The janitor's badge was gone, replaced by a simple nameplate on my chest. Joseph Martinez, Senior International Consultant. Every step echoed differently now. The same marble that used to feel cold beneath my worn-out shoes seemed to hum with a quiet kind of respect. Or maybe it was just curiosity. Heads turned as I passed. The receptionist, who had never once looked up from her phone when I emptied the trash beside her desk, gave me a cautious smile. A few employees whispered as I walked by, their voices hushed but unmistakable. I'd gone from background noise to breaking news in less than a week. "Morning, Mr. Martinez," one of the junior analysts said awkwardly, fumbling, the greeting like it was a foreign language. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone even. It still felt strange hearing Mr. Martinez from anyone other than my daughter's teacher or a bank teller. When I reached my new office, I stopped in the doorway and let myself take it in. The space was small compared to the executive's corner suites, but to me, it felt like the top of the world. A desk of my own. A computer that didn't have to be shared. A window with a view of the skyline. For the first time in years, I wasn't just cleaning up after other people's work. I was doing my own. That morning, Clara had stood on a chair by the mirror, watching me adjust my tie. "Daddy looks like a movie star," she said proudly, her little voice full of wonder. "The handsomest movie star in the whole world." I'd laughed and kissed the top of her head, trying to hide the emotion in my voice. "Well, this movie star still has to make it to work on time." She'd giggled. "Don't forget your briefcase. Movie stars have briefcases." She didn't know that the briefcase had belonged to her grandfather, a man who had crossed a border with nothing but his faith in hard work. Carrying it that morning felt like carrying more than just papers. It was carrying legacy, promise, and proof that no job, no matter how humble, could erase who I truly was. But as I settled into the chair behind my desk, reality began to settle in with me. The stares, the whispers, they weren't admiration, not yet. They were curiosity, skepticism, maybe even resentment. I was the janitor who'd leapfrogged over degrees, years, and titles to land in an executive position. That kind of leap doesn't come without turbulence. A polite knock interrupted my thoughts. My new assistant, Patricia, peeked in. She was young, sharp-eyed, and efficient. "Mr. Martinez, Miss Richardson would like to see you in her office." I nodded, grabbing my notebook and the briefcase Clara had proudly called my movie star bag. When I stepped into Olivia Richardson's office, she was pacing. Gone was the confident, composed woman I'd seen in the boardroom that night. Her hair was pulled back more tightly than usual, and the circles under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. The view from her floor stretched endlessly over the city, but she wasn't looking at it. She was staring down at a stack of documents spread across her desk like a crime scene. "We have a problem," she said before I could even sit. "Another clause?" I asked carefully. She nodded, exhaling through her nose. "The legal team spent the weekend combing through the contract, and it's worse than we thought. You were right about Yamamoto's hidden leverage, but now they've added a penalty clause, $15 million. The words hung between us like a thunderclap. $15 million, I repeated slowly, trying to process it. "As in, we owe that if we back out of the merger?" She nodded again, rubbing her temple. "They're calling it a standard development reimbursement fee. But the way it's worded, it's airtight. If we withdraw now, we'll be legally obligated to pay them for projected investments they claim to have already made." I moved closer, scanning the document. My stomach tightened as I traced the lines of legal jargon. The clause was buried deep in the revisions, camouflaged by technical language that made it look harmless. "This wasn't here before," I said. "No," she agreed. "They slipped it into the revised version after our last meeting. The lawyers caught it yesterday." She looked up at me, her eyes sharp with frustration, and something else I hadn't seen before. Fear. "Joseph, if this stands, we're trapped. We can't afford to walk away, and we can't afford to sign. Either way, they win." I took a slow breath. "And your legal team's recommendation?" "They said to negotiate down the penalty or try to delay, but Yamamoto's people aren't taking calls. They've gone silent." I leaned over the papers, analyzing every line like a surgeon studying an X-ray. "This language isn't corporate standard. It's strategic. Someone on their end built this with intent. It's meant to corner you." She folded her arms tightly across her chest, her confidence cracking. "You said last time that the Japanese clauses carried subtext. Could there be something similar here? Some cultural leverage point we're missing?" I nodded. "Possibly. They may be testing how far you'll bend before you break. In Japanese business culture, resilience earns respect, but panic invites exploitation." Olivia sank into her chair, staring at the city skyline beyond the window. "You make it sound like a chess game." "It is," I said. "But they think they're the only ones who know how to play." She looked at me then, and for the first time since we'd met, her gaze didn't carry superiority or pity. It carried trust. That realization settled heavy in the air between us. "I can't let this company collapse," she said quietly. "Not after everything my father built. We've already lost too much." I closed the folder, straightened, and met her eyes. "Then we won't let it collapse. But we need to think differently than they expect us to." There was a long silence as she studied me, her mind clearly racing. Finally, she said, "You talk like someone who's done this before." "I have," I replied, "just not from this side of the broom." That earned the faintest flicker of a smile from her, but it faded quickly. "Joseph," she said, her voice suddenly unsteady, "you've already done more for this company than anyone else in this building. But if we don't find a way out of this clause, we could lose everything. The merger, the trust of our investors, the company's reputation, it all goes." I could feel the weight of her desperation. Behind all her corporate polish, Olivia Richardson was a daughter trying to keep her father's legacy alive. She looked up at me then, her composure slipping for just a heartbeat. "Can you find us a way out?" She looked at me, desperate. "Can you find us a way out?" The man who once graded my thesis now walked beside me into the CEO's office. By Monday morning, I'd read the contract so many times the text seemed burned into my vision. Every line whispered a different form of entrapment. The Yamamoto Corporation hadn't just written a merger, they'd written a surrender, disguised as partnership. Olivia had asked me to find a way out. But what we needed wasn't just a legal loophole, it was diplomacy, precision, and cultural understanding at a level few Western negotiators ever reached. That night, after Clara had fallen asleep with her arm wrapped around her favorite stuffed rabbit, I sat at our small kitchen table with my old laptop and a notepad full of half-formed ideas. Every logical route ended in disaster, until a name from my past surfaced like a forgotten light in the dark. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, my old professor at Columbia. Mentor. The man who had once called me the bridge between two worlds. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since I'd abandoned the fellowship in Tokyo to take care of Sarah during her pregnancy. But if anyone could help me navigate the razor's edge of Japanese corporate honor, it was him. I found his number buried in an old email thread and hesitated before dialing. It was nearly midnight here, afternoon in Tokyo. The line rang twice before a familiar voice, calm and measured, answered. "Martinez-kun," he said, his accent gentle but his tone filled with warmth. "It has been a long time." "Too long, Sensei," I replied, my throat tightening. "I'm sorry for calling like this. I wouldn't if it weren't urgent." "Then it must be very urgent," he said. "Tell me." I explained everything. How I'd ended up working as a janitor, how I'd stumbled into the boardroom, how I'd uncovered Yamamoto's hidden traps. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. For a long moment, I thought the line had gone dead. Then, softly, he said, "Ah, Emoto-san's company. Yes, I know their ways." "You do?" "I taught his nephew," he said. "The one who leads their American division now. Ambitious boy. Too ambitious, perhaps. This kind of contract bears his fingerprints." I felt my pulse quicken. "So, you think this was his doing?" "Without question," he replied. "The elder Yamamoto Hiroshi is a man of honor. He would never approve such deceit, but in Japan a superior cannot easily contradict his subordinates without causing a loss of mensu, face, honor, dignity. It is delicate." That word, mensu. I remembered studying it years ago, writing an entire section of my thesis on how the concept shaped international negotiations. In Japanese culture, honor wasn't just pride, it was social gravity. Every action orbited around preserving it. "What if," I said slowly, the idea taking shape even as I spoke, "we could give him a way to correct his team's actions without losing face?" There was a pause. Then I heard the faint, approving hum that had once meant I was on the right track. "Interesting," Dr. Tanaka said. "Tell me more." By the time our call ended, a plan had begun to form, one that could dismantle the entire trap Yamamoto's nephew had built while preserving the dignity of his superiors. It was risky, unorthodox, and relied on cultural nuances that could backfire spectacularly if misunderstood. But if we executed it right, it would turn the power dynamic completely around. When I arrived at the office the next morning, Olivia looked like she hadn't slept. Her sharp posture and flawless appearance couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. "Please tell me you have something," she said as soon as I walked in. "I have someone," I corrected gently. "Dr. Kenji Tanaka. He's an expert in cross-cultural negotiation, and my former professor." She blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "You're bringing in an academic?" "He's not just an academic," I said. "He's an architect of global partnerships. He's advised 3 Fortune 500 companies on Japanese mergers. He also happens to be a personal acquaintance of President Yamamoto." That made her pause. "You're serious?" "Completely," I said. "He's flying in tonight." Her eyebrows shot up. "From Tokyo?" I nodded. He insisted. When Dr. Tanaka arrived the next morning, he looked exactly as I remembered. Sharp suit, calm demeanor, eyes that missed nothing. Even after a 12-hour flight, he carried himself with effortless dignity. As we walked together toward Olivia's office, I couldn't help but feel the strange symmetry of the moment. Years ago, I'd walked beside this man as his student. Now, I walked beside him as his partner in negotiation. Olivia stood as we entered, extending her hand politely. "Dr. Tanaka, it's an honor to meet you." He bowed slightly before shaking her hand. "The honor is mine, Miss Richardson. I have heard of your company's work in sustainable technology. Impressive innovation." Olivia looked surprised by the compliment, then motioned for him to sit. "Joseph tells me you can help us." Dr. Tanaka smiled faintly. "That depends. Will you allow me to tell you a story first?" Olivia hesitated, then nodded. "When Joseph was my student," he began, "he wrote a thesis on the art of negotiation across cultures. His work was extraordinary. He understood something most people never grasp, that business is not about winning or losing, but about balance, harmony, the preservation of dignity for both sides." Olivia's gaze flicked to me, her expression softening. "Joseph was offered a prestigious fellowship in Japan," Dr. Tanaka continued, "one that would have set him on a path toward international leadership. But his wife was ill, and he chose family over ambition. That decision," he said, looking directly at her, "told me more about his character than any academic achievement ever could." For once, Olivia was speechless. She looked between us, her posture shifting from authority to quiet respect. "I didn't know." "Few do," Dr. Tanaka said simply. "He never sought sympathy, only opportunity." Olivia turned to me. "You gave all that up?" I nodded. "Family comes first, always." For a moment the room was silent, the air heavy with unspoken emotion. Then Dr. Tanaka cleared his throat gently. "Now, about your problem. Yamamoto Corporation's negotiation team has acted without integrity, but confronting them directly would cause embarrassment to their leadership. If we approach the president himself, however, and offer a solution that allows him to correct this dishonor while saving face, we can not only escape the penalty but strengthen the relationship." Olivia leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "You think he'll listen?" Dr. Tanaka smiled. "He will if he values honor more than profit." And he does. He opened his leather folder and spread a few documents across the table: draft proposals, letters, and a revised partnership outline. "Instead of a merger," he explained, "you will propose a cultural and technological exchange, a partnership of equals. You are not backing out of cooperation. You are redefining it. This way, Yamamoto's leaders can discipline their own without public shame." Olivia's eyes widened as she read through the papers. This could actually work. "It will," Dr. Tanaka said calmly, "if Joseph leads the conversation." She looked at me, her hesitation visible. "You mean the janitor?" Dr. Tanaka smiled knowingly. "The man who just saved your company once. Perhaps it is time you let him save it again." Olivia leaned back, her expression torn between disbelief and growing trust. Finally, she nodded. "Then we'll do it. Tomorrow morning." As we left her office, Dr. Tanaka turned to me with a quiet smile. "Do you remember what I told you when you first came to my class, Joseph? That knowledge without integrity is noise," I said. He nodded approvingly. "Then let us make music tomorrow." Tomorrow's call with Tokyo would decide both my future and hers. The president of Yamamoto bowed on screen and called the janitor Sensei. The sun hadn't yet risen over the city when I arrived at the Meridian Tower. The lobby lights still glowed in soft gold, reflecting off glass and steel, making the place look like it was holding its breath before the day began. The same building that had once treated me as invisible now seemed to wait for me to walk through its doors. Inside the top-floor conference room, Olivia Richardson was already pacing. The glow from the monitors cast a pale light across her face, and though she looked composed in her tailored suit, I could see the tension in her shoulders. This wasn't just another meeting. It was Judgment Day. "Dr. Tanaka confirmed that President Yamamoto will attend personally," she said as I entered, "along with 3 senior board members. He wants you to lead the discussion." I nodded, though my stomach twisted. It was one thing to translate a contract, another entirely to negotiate with one of Japan's most powerful corporations, while the company that had once mocked me now watched from behind the camera. Dr. Tanaka entered moments later, perfectly calm, as if the gravity of the moment didn't touch him at all. He bowed to Olivia, then turned to me with a knowing smile. "Are you ready, Joseph?" I took a deep breath. "I've been ready for this for 7 years, Sensei." At exactly 6 a.m., the screens flickered to life. On the other side of the connection sat the Yamamoto Corporation's boardroom, a space as sleek and immaculate as ours. Seated at the head of their long table was President Hiroshi Yamamoto, a man with silver hair and the kind of quiet dignity that made everyone else instinctively sit straighter. "Miss Richardson," he said in flawless English, bowing slightly. "Mr. Martinez, it is a pleasure to meet you both." Olivia returned the greeting with practiced politeness, but I noticed her nervous glance toward me. When I bowed in return, it was deeper, deliberate, an acknowledgement of respect that crossed cultural lines. The president's sharp eyes noticed. "Dr. Tanaka has spoken highly of you, Mr. Martinez," he said. "He tells me you are responsible for identifying irregularities in our merger proposal." I nodded slowly. "That's correct, sir, and I appreciate you taking the time to discuss them with us directly." "Of course," he said, folding his hands. "Honor requires it. I understand there have been misunderstandings." That word, misunderstandings, was the polite Japanese way of saying something shameful occurred. It was an opening, an olive branch. "I believe so," I said carefully. "Your American operations team inserted language into the contract that didn't reflect the spirit of partnership your company is known for. We thought it best to bring it to your attention before proceeding." A murmur went around his table. The 3 board members exchanged subtle glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. Yamamoto remained perfectly still. "I was unaware of these insertions," he said after a long pause. "Can you explain your interpretation, Mr. Martinez?" I gestured to the shared screen, pulling up the relevant sections of the contract. My voice stayed calm as I explained the hidden subordination clause, the penalty structure, and the cultural implications of the phrasing. I spoke their language not just linguistically, but emotionally, with respect, precision, and no hint of arrogance. When I finished, the silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm breaks, or before honor restores balance. One of the Japanese board members leaned forward. "Your analysis is unusually perceptive for a Western consultant." I gave a small smile. "I'm not a consultant by trade, sir. I used to be a janitor in this building." Even Dr. Tanaka turned slightly, as if testing their reaction. A flicker of surprise passed through the Yamamoto boardroom. The president's eyes softened, not in pity, but in interest. "A janitor?" he repeated. "Then how did you come to understand our language and culture so well?" "I studied international business and linguistics at Columbia University," I explained. I wrote my thesis on Japanese negotiation ethics and the concept of mensu wo mamotsu, preserving honor. It changed the way I saw leadership. President Yamamoto's expression shifted from polite curiosity to quiet astonishment. "I recall that paper," he said suddenly. "A presentation in New York, years ago. The young man who argued that mutual respect creates stronger markets than competition ever could." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That was me. He smiled slowly, a rare warmth spreading across his face. "I told my executives at the time, this man understands us better than many of our own. I have wondered what became of him." Olivia's eyes widened as she turned to look at me. She hadn't known this part of my past. For a brief electric moment, the entire power dynamic of the room shifted, not in arrogance, but in recognition. "Life took a few unexpected turns, sir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But it led me here." Yamamoto nodded. "And here is where you were meant to be. A man who sacrifices ambition for family demonstrates the highest form of honor." Across the table, one of the senior board members whispered something in Japanese. I caught a few words: haji, shame; meio, honor; kaiketsu, resolution. President Yamamoto listened, then turned back to us. "It seems my nephew and his team acted without my full knowledge," he said gravely. "Such behavior brings dishonor to our name. Dr. Tanaka has proposed a solution, a cultural and technological exchange instead of a merger. I find this idea most agreeable." Olivia exhaled, the tension melting from her shoulders. "That's wonderful news, Mr. Yamamoto." He inclined his head. "It allows both our companies to collaborate as equals, while correcting the error of my subordinates. The penalty clause will be voided immediately. You have my personal assurance." I bowed again, deeper this time. "You have our gratitude, sir." But then, something unexpected happened. Yamamoto turned toward the camera, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Martinez," he said softly, "in Japan we have a saying, the man who sweeps the floor sees the dust others ignore. You have reminded us all that wisdom does not depend on rank." And then, slowly, deliberately, he bowed to me. On the other side of the world, the president of one of Japan's most powerful corporations had just bowed to the janitor who once cleaned the offices of the company that nearly lost everything. When he straightened, there was a faint smile on his lips. "Arigato, sensei." The word hit me harder than any title or award ever could. Sensei. Teacher. Olivia was staring at me, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. Dr. Tanaka's smile was quiet, proud. For the rest of the call, the tone had completely changed. The conversation flowed like water. Graceful, balanced, full of mutual respect. By the time we ended the meeting, both sides had agreed to the new cultural exchange partnership. No one had lost face. No one had been humiliated. Instead, honor had spoken louder than money. When the call ended, Olivia sat back, still processing what had just happened. "He called you sensei," she said softly, almost to herself. "I've never seen anything like that." I looked down at my hands, still trembling slightly. Neither have I. For the first time, silence in that conference room didn't feel heavy. It felt earned, but even as relief washed through me, I couldn't shake a quiet unease, a whisper of intuition that the peace we'd built would not go unchallenged. But back home, not everyone wanted the hero to stay. They smiled in meetings, but plotted my downfall in whispers. For a few days after the meeting with Yamamoto Corporation, the air in Richardson Industries felt different, lighter, hopeful. Employees walked with a sense of pride again. The boardroom buzzed with words like restructuring and growth. And for the first time in years, Olivia's office door stayed open instead of shut. But underneath that fragile sense of renewal, something darker began to stir. You could feel it in the glances that lingered too long, in the sudden hush of voices when I entered a room. On the surface, people congratulated me, shaking my hand, calling me "Sir" now instead of "Hey, janitor." Yet behind those smiles, Resentment was growing like mold under polished marble. Richard was the first to show it. Once Olivia's most loyal vice president, he now avoided eye contact with me in meetings. Margaret from HR, whose department I'd just exposed as riddled with inefficiencies, kept her smiles tight, her tone brittle. And David, the marketing director, who had once been charming in a shallow, corporate way, now greeted me with silence. They saw my promotion not as redemption, but as betrayal, a disruption of the hierarchy that had always protected them. 3 weeks after the Yamamoto deal was finalized, Olivia called an all-executive meeting to discuss the company's next phase of restructuring. I didn't realize until I stepped into the boardroom that the meeting wasn't about progress. It was about rebellion. They were all there, Richard, Margaret, David, and a few of their allies, sitting together like a jury waiting to deliver a verdict. Olivia sat at the head of the table, unaware that she was standing on a fault line about to split. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her tone steady. "As you know, Mr. Martinez has been appointed Senior Consultant for International Strategy. His insights have already saved this company from a devastating merger, and I believe his continued guidance will—" "Will what, exactly?" Richard interrupted, his voice sharp enough to slice through her sentence. "Save us from ourselves?" Olivia blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Let's be honest here. We're restructuring this company based on the advice of a man who, 3 weeks ago, was scrubbing floors." The words hit the room like a slap. I stayed silent, watching. Olivia's voice cooled. "Richard, I think we've already established Mr. Martinez's qualifications." He gave a humorless laugh. "Qualifications? What qualifications? He's a janitor who happened to speak Japanese. That doesn't make him an executive." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Margaret crossed her arms. "Employees are questioning the decision, Olivia. They're saying this promotion violates HR policy. There was no vetting process, no interview, no background check." "Background check?" I asked quietly, finally speaking. "You mean the kind HR forgets to do on executives who embezzle company funds?" Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Olivia looked between us, tension rising. "What exactly is going on here?" David leaned forward. "What's going on is a crisis of credibility," he said. "The staff doesn't know whether to follow your leadership or his. Frankly, this whole thing looks like chaos to investors." "And whose fault is that?" I asked. The room went still. "You talk about credibility," I continued, stepping closer to the whiteboard at the front of the room. "But let's talk about results. In the last 5 years, this company's profits dropped 12%. 3 mergers failed. 2 departments overspent by millions. And yet, the only time anyone decided to question leadership was when the janitor dared to open his mouth." I picked up a marker and began to write, the squeak echoing in the silent room. "Henderson Tech, passed on acquisition, lost $20 million potential growth. HR executive hires, 3 early terminations, 2.7 meters loss. Ecoline campaign, failed marketing strategy, 5 meters loss." Each line appeared on the board like a confession. "These are your decisions," I said, turning towards them. "Your mistakes. I've cleaned up after them, literally and financially. You call me unqualified. But tell me, how many of you have actually read your own contracts line by line? How many of you know what your subsidiaries are doing in Singapore or Prague? Because I do. I've read every file you've ignored for years." Richard stood abruptly. "You think you can come in here and humiliate us?" I didn't flinch. "No, Richard. I think you've been doing a fine job of that yourselves." Olivia's gaze flicked between us, a mix of anger and realization crossing her face. The other executives looked anywhere but at me. The air was thick with something raw, fear, guilt, pride. David was the first to crack. "Look, maybe we made a few bad calls, but this company runs on experience, not idealism. You can't run a corporation on moral speeches." "Then maybe that's why you've been running it into the ground," I replied. He started to argue, but Olivia raised a hand. "Enough," she said sharply. "All of you." Her voice cut through the room, but Richard wasn't finished. Olivia, with all due respect, this company can't survive if decisions are being made emotionally. We need to re-establish order. That means reviewing Martinez's position and authority before this experiment gets out of hand. Margaret nodded quickly. We need to make sure the board understands this was a temporary arrangement. Olivia's jaw tightened. Temporary? David leaned forward. We're not saying he hasn't been helpful. But giving him access to executive files, influence over strategy, that's dangerous. It undermines chain of command. The phrase chain of command hung in the air like smoke. It wasn't about structure. It was about control. About people terrified that the janitor who saw too much might expose what else was hiding behind their titles. I could feel the weight of their hostility pressing in from every angle. I knew this wouldn't end with words. They didn't just want to limit me. They wanted to erase me, to restore the hierarchy I'd disrupted by simply existing in their world. I capped the marker and turned slowly toward them. So that's what this is about, I said. Not policy, not protocol, fear. Richard bristled. Fear? Of what? Of being seen, I said quietly. Of accountability. You've built this company on blind spots, and now someone's finally turned on the lights. Olivia's expression changed, realization dawning in her eyes. She saw it too now. This wasn't about me threatening their authority. It was about me uncovering truths they didn't want seen. Richard adjusted his tie, trying to regain composure. The board will have to review this, he said curtly. And until they do, I suggest your access to company files be suspended. I let the silence stretch. Then, very calmly, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. The rustle of paper in that quiet room sounded louder than any argument. Every pair of eyes followed it as I placed it gently on the conference table. You can talk about limiting my authority all you want, I said, my voice steady. But before you decide anything, I slid the envelope toward Richard. Read this. I placed a manila envelope on the table. Before you decide that, read this. For 5 years, I swept their mess and kept the receipts. For years, I had been cleaning up after other people's chaos, spilled coffee, shredded papers, broken promises, and quiet corruption. Most people thought janitors didn't see or hear much. But the truth is, when you're invisible, you become the best observer in the room. Every night, as executives left behind confidential printouts and half-torn memos, I had picked up the fragments they discarded without a thought. I didn't collect them for revenge. I collected them because something deep inside me refused to believe that silence was survival forever. Now, those fragments were neatly organized in the thick manila envelope, sitting at the center of the conference table. The same people who once mocked me were watching it like it was ticking. Olivia stared at me, her expression unreadable. What is this? Everything you've been missing, I said quietly. Everything they've been hiding. Richard's face went pale. You're bluffing. Open it, I replied. He hesitated, then slid his finger under the flap. The first sound of tearing paper echoed like thunder in the silent room. One by one, he pulled out files, contracts, emails, and balance sheets. As he read, the blood drained from his face. These are internal reports, he muttered. Private correspondence, procurement receipts. I nodded. Fraudulent procurement, to be exact. Over the last 5 years, 3 of your department heads have approved fake vendor invoices, payments to shell companies under their own names. Margaret's voice broke the silence. That's ridiculous. We have audits. Everything is checked. I turned toward her. By your office, the same one that approved expense reports listing non-existent consultation services and duplicate travel reimbursements. I pointed to one of the documents in Richard's shaking hands. Page 6, line 14, $78,000 billed to a company called Viridian Global Logistics. That company doesn't exist. It's a shell created by one of your assistant directors. Olivia snatched the papers from Richard's hand, her eyes scanning the lines rapidly. With every passing second, her face hardened. There's more, I continued. Kickbacks, Contracts redirected to friendly firms in exchange for personal bonuses. Information leaks to competitors during bidding rounds. I've tracked over a dozen deals sabotaged internally for profit. Total losses to Richardson Industries, $37 million. A collective gasp went around the table. Even the walls seemed to absorb the weight of the number. Olivia looked up slowly, her eyes burning with disbelief and fury. 37 million? Yes, I said. All from within these walls, hidden behind layers of paperwork and trust. David slammed his hand on the table. You expect us to believe you? You think we'd risk prison for a few side deals? I walked over to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. I don't expect you to believe me, I said evenly. I expect you to recognize your own signatures. One by one, I wrote down company names, invoice numbers, and initials, every transaction that had been quietly siphoning money from the company's veins. The more I wrote, the quieter the room became. Margaret's breath hitched. Richard's jaw locked. David's complexion turned gray. You, Margaret began, her voice trembling. You can't possibly have all this. These are confidential records. How did you even— I cleaned your offices, I interrupted. Every night. You'd be surprised what people throw away when they think no one's watching. Olivia stood frozen. Her eyes moved between me and the board, between her executives and the proof of their betrayal. The woman who'd once mocked me for my uniform now looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I trusted you, she whispered, staring at her team. All of you. Richard tried to recover. This doesn't prove anything. It could all be fabricated. Then call accounting, I said. Ask them to verify each transaction. The records are still in your system. The audit trail doesn't lie. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, Olivia did. Patricia, she said, turning toward her assistant by the door, get internal auditing on the line, now. 10 agonizing minutes passed, while Patricia verified the records one by one. When she returned, her face was pale, her voice shaking. They're real, she said softly. Every transaction, every signature. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard sank into his chair, eyes unfocused. Margaret buried her face in her hands. David muttered something under his breath and stared at the table like it could save him. Olivia closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against her temple. How long? She asked quietly. 5 years, I said. It started small. Petty reimbursements, false receipts. But it grew. They learned no one was watching. She turned to her executives, her voice trembling but cold. You sat here in my boardroom preaching loyalty while you were bleeding my father's company dry. No one answered. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. The arrogance that once defined her had vanished. What remained was something raw and human. Heartbreak. Betrayal wasn't just a wound to pride. It was a fracture in trust. I didn't bring this to embarrass anyone, I said quietly. But truth has to mean something again. You can rebuild systems, replace money. But once trust is gone, it doesn't come back easily. Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. What do you want, Joseph? Justice, I said simply. Not revenge. I want the company to stand for something again. For the people who work hard, not the ones who exploit it. She stared at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. You'll have it. By noon, the internal audit team had arrived. Documents were collected, statements taken. Margaret broke first, confessing her part in authorizing false expense claims. Richard tried to threaten legal retaliation until the evidence of offshore accounts surfaced. David stayed silent, eyes empty, until Olivia told him to clear his desk. The three of them were escorted out before the end of the day. No handshakes, no words, just the quiet shuffle of shoes down the hallway where I had once pushed my mop. When the last of them was gone, the boardroom was empty except for Olivia and me. She sat at the head of the table, staring down at the stack of papers like they were ghosts. My father built this company with his bare hands, she said finally. He trusted me to protect it, and I let wolves in. You couldn't have known, I said softly. She gave a bitter smile. I should have. That's what leaders are supposed to do. I didn't reply. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like pity. After a long silence, she looked up at me, her eyes glassy but searching. You could have gone to the press with this, she said. You could have destroyed us. I didn't want destruction, I said. I wanted truth. For the first time since I'd met her, Olivia Richardson didn't look like a CEO. She looked like a person trying to find her balance again after realizing the ground beneath her had been false all along. Her voice was soft, trembling at the edge of something personal. Who are you really, Joseph? Olivia whispered. Who are you really, Joseph? Before I cleaned floors, I almost lost my life to the same kind of corruption. The boardroom had been silent for nearly a minute after Olivia asked that question. Who are you really, Joseph? For years, I'd been waiting for someone to ask that. Not as an accusation, but as a need to understand. The truth was a wound I'd kept stitched shut for too long. But after everything that had happened, maybe it was time to finally let it breathe. Miss Richardson, I began quietly. Before I cleaned floors, I was an analyst at Crawford Financial. Her brows knit together, uncertain. A financial firm? Yes, I said. A mid-sized investment company in Manhattan. I was 25, married, expecting my first child, and I thought I'd finally made it. I had a mentor, a team that respected me. Or so I thought. Then I discovered discrepancies in client accounts. Millions shifted quietly between offshore funds, all under my supervisor's authorization. I swallowed hard. The memories tasted bitter even now. When I confronted him, he told me to mind my own business, said I was young, didn't understand how the world worked, but I couldn't stay silent. I reported him to compliance, and 2 weeks later I was arrested for embezzlement. Olivia's eyes widened. You were framed, I said simply. He'd been preparing for months, building a paper trail that led straight to me. Fake authorizations, doctored emails, false signatures. When the FBI raided the office, they found everything pointing to my name. I could still feel the cold metal of the handcuffs on my wrists. The sting of humiliation as neighbors watched from their windows. My wife, Sarah, holding our baby bump as she cried in disbelief. It took 18 months to clear my name. 18 months of hearings, debt, and public shame. By the time I was fully exonerated, Crawford Financial had collapsed, my supervisor had fled the country, and every company in the city saw me as toxic. Olivia sat back slowly, absorbing each word. And your wife? She couldn't take it, I said softly. The stress, the whispers, the eviction notices. When Clara was 18 months old, Sarah packed a bag and left. Said she needed to find peace somewhere far away from my past. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the city outside the window. I took whatever work I could get, I continued. Temp jobs, manual labor, but corporate America doesn't forgive easily. When you're accused of white-collar crime, even if you're proven innocent, the stain never fades. So I applied for janitorial work. No background checks, no judgment, just honest labor. Olivia's gaze softened. You did all this for Clara? Yes, I said. For her, I could be invisible. She leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. Joseph, you could have told me. I shook my head. And what would you have thought, Miss Richardson? The janitor with a criminal record? You wouldn't have trusted me with a conference room, let alone a contract. Her expression flickered. Guilt, realization, something else she couldn't name. After a long silence, she stood and crossed to her desk. Wait here, she said, pulling open her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she typed, her eyes narrowing in concentration. I watched her search something, then stop abruptly. My God. What? She turned the screen toward me. The page glowed with a headline from the Columbia Business Review. Whistleblower analyst saves investors $40 million in Crawford financial scandal. My breath caught. There was my name, Joseph Martinez, 27, whose early reporting led to the exposure of systemic fraud. I started, shaking my head. I never saw this. I thought... Olivia scrolled further. There are dozens of articles, Joseph. You were cleared completely. In fact, several firms offered you positions after the case was closed. Senior compliance roles, ethics consulting, risk management. You were supposed to have rebuilt your life years ago. Then why didn't I get any of those offers? I asked, disbelief twisting in my voice. Not one call, not one letter, nothing. She frowned, then picked up her phone. I'll find out. An hour later, she came back with an expression that chilled me more than any accusation ever had. I had security look into our internal records, she said. Joseph, someone's been tampering with your correspondence. What do you mean? I mean every job offer you were supposed to receive, every letter, every phone message, was intercepted. Someone rerouted your mail, deleted emails, and redirected calls before they ever reached you. My pulse thundered in my ears. Who? She hesitated. Richard Chen, Margaret's husband. He's been working in our mailroom for years, since before you joined. He handled executive mail and courier routing. He's part of the same network that was embezzling funds. The floor seemed to tilt under me. You're telling me he cut off every opportunity that might have lifted you out of that janitor's uniform, Olivia said grimly. They kept you invisible, Joseph. Not because of who you were, but because of what you represented. A man who exposed corruption. They were terrified you'd do it again. For a moment, I couldn't speak. 7 years of lost time, of humiliation, of Clara asking why Daddy had to work so hard. Every memory twisted into something sharper, crueler. Olivia's voice softened. You weren't forgotten. You were silenced. I sat down slowly, the weight of that truth pressing on me like stone. All this time, I murmured, I thought the world had decided I wasn't worth saving. She came closer, setting a hand gently on my shoulder. The world didn't forget you, Joseph. It just didn't get the chance to know you. Then she took a deep breath and straightened. You've done more for this company in 3 weeks than some of my executives have in years. You saved us from a disastrous merger, exposed corruption, and rebuilt our integrity. You belong here, not as a consultant, but as a leader. I blinked, uncertain I'd heard right. What are you saying? I'm saying, she replied firmly, I want you to be our chief operating officer. For a moment, I just stared at her. Co. The title that would have been a fantasy a month ago. Olivia, This isn't charity, she said, cutting me off. This is justice. You've earned this. And maybe it's time we showed the world what happens when integrity wins. I should have felt victorious, but something in me hesitated. Maybe I'd learned not to trust miracles that arrived too suddenly. If I take this position, I said slowly, it has to mean something. Every employee, every janitor, guard, and clerk gets treated with the same respect as the people in this office. She smiled faintly. Then it settled. The moment hung between us. Quiet, fragile, hopeful. Then her phone buzzed. She frowned, reached for it, and froze. What is it? I asked. She didn't answer. She turned to the wall-mounted TV in her office and grabbed the remote. The screen lit up instantly, the bold red banner flashing across the news channel. Breaking news, corporate corruption exposed at Richardson Industries. The reporter's voice filled the room. Sources confirm that a janitor-turned-consultant, Joseph Martinez, is at the center of a massive corporate scandal involving alleged blackmail, unauthorized surveillance, and internal manipulation of company leadership. Martinez, who was previously charged with financial crimes at another firm, is now under scrutiny for potential misconduct. Olivia's face went white. Oh no. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as they scrolled across the ticker. Janitor turns whistleblower, or blackmailer. The TV headline read, Janitor turns whistleblower, or blackmailer. They called it a hearing, but it felt like Judgment Day. The boardroom was filled with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. The long mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the walls seemed to lean inward, as if even they wanted to listen. The same room where I had once emptied trash cans now held 12 of the most powerful people in Richardson Industries, gathered to decide whether I would walk out a hero or in disgrace. The media storm outside was deafening. Reporters crowded the lobby, shouting questions. Headlines blared words like fraud, blackmail, and betrayal. My name had become a brand of controversy overnight. But inside this room, I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about my daughter, about Clara sitting in class, blissfully unaware that her father's face was flashing across national news screens. Board Chairman William Harrison, a silver-haired man who had once been Olivia's father's partner, called the meeting to order. This session concerns the allegations circulating in the media regarding internal misconduct and the actions of Mr. Joseph Martinez, he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were weary. Miss Richardson, you've requested the opportunity to present evidence before the board makes any decision. You may proceed. Olivia stood, calm but resolute. Gone was the arrogance of a woman who once believed herself untouchable. What remained was conviction, the kind born from being wrong and finding the courage to admit it. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, she began, the reports you've read are misleading, and the people who leaked them are the same ones who nearly destroyed this company from within. I owe this company the truth, and I owe it to Mr. Martinez. She gestured toward me, and every eye in the room turned my way. Some looked curious, others skeptical, a few quietly hostile. I could feel their judgment pressing against my skin, but I stood my ground. Olivia continued. 3 weeks ago, this company was on the brink of collapse because of a fraudulent merger with Yamamoto Corporation. Mr. Martinez, while employed as janitorial staff, identified a hidden clause that would have cost us everything. His translation and analysis saved us $50 million and exposed internal corruption responsible for at least $37 million in losses. The people accusing him of manipulation were the same executives caught stealing from Richardson Industries. A low murmur rippled through the board members. Miss Richardson, one of them interrupted. That's quite a claim. Do you have evidence? I do. She tapped a tablet, and the screen behind her came alive with documents. The same files I had once laid out in that envelope. Emails, bank transfers, signed approvals. Every piece verified by our auditors, she said. Every one of them obtained legally. Mr. Martinez's only crime was paying attention to the things the rest of us ignored. I watched her speak, and for the first time I realized she wasn't defending me out of obligation. She believed in me now, not because I'd forced her to, but because I'd earned it. When she finished, Harrison nodded. Thank you, Miss Richardson. Mr. Martinez, do you wish to respond? I stood slowly, the chair's legs scraping the floor behind me. My palms were sweating, but my voice, when it came, was steady. For 5 years, I was the man you all walked past in the hallways. You didn't see me because you didn't have to. I emptied your trash, polished your tables, and disappeared before the lights came on. But while I was invisible, I was watching. Not out of bitterness, but out of hope. Because this company used to mean something. I took a deep breath and looked each of them in the eye. When I came here, I wasn't just a janitor. I was a man trying to rebuild his life after losing everything to corruption at another firm. I was framed, cleared, and forgotten. I took this job because no one else would hire me. I did it for my daughter, Clara, the 6-year-old who tells everyone her daddy works in a shiny building. She doesn't know what a scandal is. She just knows her father works hard and tries to do the right thing. The room was silent. Not cold this time, but listening. Really listening. What I did here wasn't blackmail, I said quietly. It was survival, for the truth, for the integrity of this company, and for every worker who's ever been treated like they didn't matter. I'm not asking you to clear my name. I'm asking you to look at the evidence and decide what kind of company you want to be. For a moment, no one moved. Then, from the back of the room, a familiar voice spoke. If I may, said Dr. Kenji Tanaka, stepping forward. Every head turned as the professor bowed slightly. "I am here today because I have known Mr. Martinez for many years," he said. "He was one of my brightest students at Columbia University. His research on ethical negotiation influenced business leaders across Asia, including President Yamamoto himself." A few board members murmured in surprise. Dr. Tanaka continued, "Mr. Martinez did not come here to exploit your company. He came here to serve it, as he has served every principle he believes in. In Japanese culture, we honor those who protect integrity over profit. Mr. Martinez embodies that honor." When he sat down, the room felt changed. The hostility had drained out, replaced by a contemplative stillness. Harrison leaned toward his fellow board members, speaking in hushed tones. Minutes passed. The only sound was the soft ticking of the wall clock. Finally, he rose. "This board has reached a decision." My breath caught. "First," he said, his voice formal but warm, "we recognize that the allegations circulating in the media are false and malicious. Mr. Martinez acted legally, ethically, and in the best interest of Richardson Industries. The individuals responsible for leaking misinformation will be subject to legal action." Olivia exhaled audibly, relief flickering across her face. "Second," Harrison continued, "this board formally commends both Miss Richardson and Mr. Martinez for restoring this company's integrity and reputation. Effective immediately, Mr. Joseph Martinez is appointed Chief Operating Officer of Richardson Industries, with full executive authority to oversee corporate ethics, operations, and international partnerships." For a second, I couldn't move. The words didn't feel real. Harrison smiled faintly. "You've cleaned this company from the inside out, Mr. Martinez. It's time you help us rebuild it." Applause rose. Quiet at first, then growing as more board members stood. Olivia turned to me, her eyes bright. "Congratulations, Joseph," she said softly. "You earned this." But all I could think of was Clara, her tiny hands coloring drawings at home, her voice telling Mrs. Henderson, "My daddy helps make the big shiny building sparkle." Now she could finally be right in every sense. Epilogue. 6 months later. The marble floors of Meridian Tower gleamed just as they always had, but everything else had changed. The security guards smiled when I passed. The cafeteria staff greeted me by name. On every floor, new posters displayed our company's new motto, "Integrity is our foundation." Olivia and I shared leadership now, not as CEO and subordinate, but as partners who had earned each other's respect the hard way. Dr. Tanaka had returned to Tokyo, but his portrait hung in our new Global Ethics office, a quiet reminder that honor still had a place in modern business. At home, Clara had added a new drawing to the refrigerator door. It showed me standing beside a tall building, shaking, hands with smiling people. Above us, in her careful 6-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "My daddy helps people." Sometimes I stood and looked at that picture, thinking of how far we'd come. The janitor, the CEO, the daughter who believed. I used to clean their floors. Now I help them stand taller. And this time everyone sees me. I used to clean their floors. Now I help them stand taller. And this time, everyone sees me. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it. Because someone out there might need this reminder that integrity still matters. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated but proved them wrong? Your story deserves to be heard, too. And if you want more true, powerful stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and stay with us for the next chapter.